right, as we've been discussing throughout the program, the party adopted its 2024 platform earlier today. It's a 16-page document. I was able to read through it earlier this afternoon myself. It's only about a quarter of the length of previous party platforms, by the way. But we've also covered how the platform has abandoned protections for the unborn, frankly, protections that have been there in every party platform since the 1980s. But before we go today, I think it's important for us to discuss this platform as it relates to other important issues, particularly issues that are important to the SageCons, to the spiritually active, governance engaged individuals. All right, joining me now to discuss this is Travis Weber. He's the Vice President for Policy and Government Affairs here at the Family Research Council. Travis, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jody. It's good to be on.
All right, so before we get into some of the specifics of some of these other issues I want to cover, just give me your 30,000-foot perspective of the platform today.
Yeah, so I was able to observe the process that unfolded today, and there were several things that really struck me about it. One was just the tight reign of it was really a feeling of control that was being exerted upon the whole process, and these are delegates that are selected to represent the interests of the people in a national gathering of the Republican Party to determine what policy positions the party will determine it wants to rally around. That should be a process with input, with collaboration, involving hearing the perspectives of the delegates. None of that was present, and it was abundantly clear that there was an agreement behind whoever was running things today, that they wanted to retain a tight control on things and stop that. Well, you make that decision, you get what happened. You get a frustrated group of people who are not feeling heard in a process in which they should feel heard. So that was very clear. I think it was a missed opportunity. And it was very disappointing because no one's fooling anyone. Everyone knows when someone is trying to ram something down their throat. And it was very clear that this was being rammed down the throats of everyone there today.
Yeah, and we've had some other guests who are on with us today, some people that come from all over the country, some serving on different committees, subcommittees, this, that, and the other, and they come here for what typically is going to be a couple of days process, and within a couple of hours, it's over. And I've spoken with people today who literally said, "Why am I here? I spent all this money. We've come here. We didn't even have subcommittee meetings. It's just done. It's over."
Jody, these are in many cases elected officials, and upon entry, they had to place their phones in a bag so they couldn't access their cell phones.
Couldn't even have it.
You couldn't use it in there, right? Meanwhile, this is being discussed in the discussion this morning. This point's being raised. And Senator Blackburn is asked why the RNC staff get to have their phones, and she said, well, they have to work. That's not a reason. It made no sense. It was baffling, it was bizarre, and it made a mockery of, it disrespected the people who were selected to go here. So in my observation, the process was in shambles, and you look at the document that was agreed upon today, there's some good things in this document.
Sure.
I think you'd actually have more people rallying around it if they didn't feel so stepped on and disrespected in this entire process.
Yeah, and I felt the same thing. My reaction reading through this afternoon, I thought, okay, this is good stuff. It did sound, and I believe Tony referenced this and put it in this frame earlier, that it came across more as a campaign document rather than a platform of the party. And that's how I felt reading it. It sounded like I'm reading a campaign speech. There's some good stuff in there, but it's a lot of fluff too, quite frankly.
There is, I agree. The way in which this comes across is campaign driven and almost aimed at winning an election in November. It's understandable, obviously. Everyone understands that.
Election.
It's an important election. And I don't really think people who are involved in analyzing what happened today are against President Trump. That's an unfortunate kind of feeling that's out there, but the reality is they're against the way in which the process was being so iron-fisted. There was a perception of the reality of iron fist around the process. And so, I think it's an observation we make about what was produced, campaign-driven, but let's, and we can look at it, but the reality is that we have to, it's an important point that this document transcends any one election.
Right.
Right. And so we have to distinguish that from a campaign. But even if we look at what's in it, I mean, I'm just looking at a version right now. We could look at school choice, parental rights, addressing the issue of CRT and gender indoctrination. They go through banning taxpayer funding for gender transition procedures, combating anti-Semitism, empowering American families, defending religious liberty. This is a list
taxes,
of some good stuff.
Economic stuff, the
Right.
border. There's good stuff, but Travis, let's go back because I was shocked at the size, how much smaller this is from previous platforms. So let's talk about this. Let's, if you can, kind of give us a perspective of this platform compared to previous platforms, say 2016 when President Trump first came. Let's talk about the difference of this and other platforms.
Yeah, I mean, it's much shorter. A lot of the substance is containing one or two lines. It does not have descriptions of what the party will pledge to do around a certain issue. So in one sense, it's harder to get our minds around what's the actual position of the party. Now, sometimes that's clear. I mean, it's clear, okay, no taxpayer funding for gender transition. I agree, it's a good policy. But let's look at another area. There's only 2 mentions of God in this platform. There was 15 mentions in 2016. That's a big reduction. And I think it's very important. We have to honor God in our nation. And it was also something that struck me about the process today. God was not given a place of honor in that room. It was like everything was focused on the election. We live with under the grace of God here, and we really need to make sure we have integrity when we're saying things about that. We need to not take that lightly, not use it for our own purposes. We cannot use that for an election. And it's very dangerous when we start to do that. And so I was struck and concerned about the reduction in God being mentioned in the platform, but also very concerned about the way God was not honored. He was not given a place of honor. He was used in the discussion this morning. But just to return to your question about this, about the platform, Jody, clearly there's some good stuff in it. We have to recognize that. And I've been going through that. But if you look at the life issue, clearly it's already been discussed, but really gutted. The 14th Amendment is mentioned, but it's not explicitly tied to protection for the unborn. And it's concerning that birth control and IVF are being pushed with the concerning ethical implications in both of those areas. In addition, significant areas were taken out that were in 2016. No taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood and no mention of Hyde Amendment, basically about taxpayer funding for abortion domestically or Mexico City policy globally. Those are no-brainers to have in. The American people clearly support not sending our taxpayer dollars to those. I don't know why they were taken out. That's not good, though. I don't think it makes sense. I think they should be included in part of any conservative set of policy proposals. They're discussing gender transition, so why not apply the same principle, no taxpayer funding to abortion? So there's, in terms of the comparison, big sections that are left as black holes. There's no international religious freedom discussion in the current platform text as well. And in addition to that, there's really not a lot of language about the role the United States can play as a beacon of light globally, proclaiming goodness, protecting human rights as a beacon of virtue globally. That's important. We have to use our national power for that to bless others in other nations. A lot of the language just on, it just cut that out. It didn't discuss that. It kind of was focused on America and the strength of America, a lot of the economic focus. Understandably, we need to be strong or we can't help others, but there's a purpose to being strong, and we have to recognize that purpose is given to our nation by God. and we have to honor him in seeking to continue to fulfill that purpose.
Absolutely. And a couple of other things that jumped out to me in going through it that were mentioned, but just on such a surface, it was just weak, was the issue of marriage. One time I made a reference to something about the sanctity of marriage, but it didn't define what marriage was. It didn't say anything about being between a man and a woman. I mean, either side could embrace that, and the same with Israel. There was nothing really about Israel except we will stand with Israel. Well, I know in the past we've been pretty straightforward on those type of issues.
Yeah, Jody, both those areas were really reduced. I'm looking at the marriage language now. It's Republicans will promote a culture that values the sanctity of marriage, the blessings of childhood, the foundational role of families, and supports working parents. We will end policies that punish families. Okay, nothing really bad about that, but it leaves gaps. It leaves wiggle room for people to massage and manipulate the language and say, well, marriage, that includes marriage between a man and a man. That's not how God defines marriage. We don't have the authority to change marriage in that way. And all of a sudden now, the Republican Party platform has
Doesn't say what marriage is.
Not clarified that.
Right.
So we have departed from a recognition of what God says about it. There's a separation. And once we lose our mooring and our anchor to what God says about it, you're adrift. That's a dangerous place to be.
Down. Yeah.
And that is adrift. Again, nothing wrong in a negative sense here, but it's adrift, and it allows a whole, it leaves gaps and wiggle room for people to push policies that are clear, even more, that are harmful through the language here.
And similar thing with Israel, I thought.
Yeah.
Basically just said, as I recall, a comment that we will stand with Israel. And I'm thinking, well, I mean, right now Israel's in a war. I mean, we're dealing with Hamas, and all we can say is we'll stand with Israel. What does that even mean?
We could have been a lot clearer. They could have been a lot more clear on that. Again, it's very minimal. That leaves a lot of wiggle room for people to propose their own policy for what that means. And as Christians, we should be very clear. We should seek to be very clear about our stance with Israel, especially in light of the times where hostility all around the world is growing. We've seen that very, very clear domestically. So the Republicans had a chance to clarify that as well. I agree. We need to be very strong and clear about that.
Well, there was a lot of other things. I know our time's kind of slipping away, but there were some good things about protecting children, women's sports, that type of thing, that the Republicans would take a stand against that type of thing. Overall, though, what are you hearing from other people as you've been in and out of the crowd talking with people? What are you hearing? Be it about the process or about the document itself.
Yeah, I mean, Jody, we've already discussed a little bit about the process, but it's been a point of discussion that it's quite ironic that the two times today there was a point made from one of the experts that were selected to go and present on content. And look, nothing against the experts; they seem knowledgeable in their fields, but that's not the point. The point is, as we've already discussed, this should have been a deliberative process. And instead, everyone is marched in. Their phones are basically functionally put out of use for them, and they're forced to listen to speeches about why they should support this. And then those speeches are tied with pressure tactics to you need to support the president's reelection. No one in there is opposing the president. They're just seeking to be honored and respected and around the table.
Right.
It's a deliberative process. They want a good platform, right? And so, that was not the sense of things, and it was highlighted at 2 points where one of the experts made a point about protecting free speech, needing to deal with censorship that liberal Dems are pushing. Meanwhile, they're doing this in an iron-fisted process where phones are functionally confiscated,
free speech.
And they're taking pictures of people based on how they're voting, and the RNC staff's running around with green signs saying vote yes. It was mockery of things. This is just for me observing it. I'm not even really participating. I'm observing this. What do you think people are going to think? You can't even sit there and talk about free speech when the process is conducted that way. So it needs to be called out and recognized. That's just a fact. I mean, that was a fact of what happened today.
Okay. We've only got about a minute or so left. Real quickly, where does this go from here? Does this now go to the convention next week for final approval, or is it done? And how can our viewers and listeners best pray at this
Yeah,
point?
well, look, I mean, we're raising concerns because we have to be honest. We cannot ignore things that we believe are essential for the blessing and flourishing of our nation. But again, we're in the conservative community. We want to be supportive. We just have to recognize we cannot. We have to be in this together and recognize God in his seat of in the place of honor is and recognizing Him in this process. So in terms of moving ahead, I think it's important to frame things that way. I think if people will kind of correct the imbalances that have risen where people not being heard around the table here and make those corrections, I think some of this could be addressed. I think we're going to continue to engage as we have engaged the Platform Integrity Project, but it'll be, the final text will be, finally ratified at the convention, but we're going to continue to engage to highlight the issues that we believe are essential because we believe are essential for the blessing of our nation. It's not about us, but it's about the flourishing of the nation so we can be a blessing to the world.
Well, and this is a time, Travis, and I know you agree, that we need the body of Christ stepping up, engaging this thing, praying for our country, praying for the convention as they meet next week. This is a time for the church to have her finest hour and to
Yes,
step up.
we need to ask the Lord for His help.
Absolutely. Travis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I appreciate this discussion so much.